G'day lads, and welcome to this video where I attempt to provide some reasons as to why the Australian cricket team has been so mediocre in the T20 format for a considerable period. Breaking from normal tradition, I will not be focusing on stats in today's video. However, I'll be talking about three broad phenomenons which have put Australian T20 cricket behind several other nations. A broader cultural indifference stemming to the board and some past players missing key tours as we are seeing now, and selection issues which have seen Australia unable to find a consistent second or third pace bowler, and players being forced to bat out of position from their normal T20 positions. Let's start with cultural attitudes. Australia has been playing cricket for a very, very long time, since the early 1800s in fact. Our test history stretches back over 150 years, and nearly 150 years, and our ODI history stretches back 50. By comparison, Australia was initially a reluctant admitter to the growth of the T20 game into international cricket. The Australian cricket public lacks a connection to T20 cricket like they do with Test cricket. Contrasting with Test cricket. Australians often fall in love with the narrative of famed series such as contests between Australia and England, Australia and South Africa, Australia and the West Indies, and other ripping series that formed the backbone of Australian cricket in the past. By contrast, the Australian cricketing public has a sort of ambivalence towards T20 cricket. We accept it. The cricket board is extremely happy with the money it makes, but other than during the Big Bash, we don't really pay attention to it. And then talking about the Big Bash, it is organised in a really confusing way, as if it has been lumped in the summer as a means to generate as much money as possible with a bloated schedule which forces several key international players to miss out. It is almost as if the Australian Cricket Board is just like, well, this thing is new, we're going to make as much money from it as possible, but we're not really going to try hard at investing in it properly. And that has contributed to some of the national disdain or lack of interest in this T20 format. You can see that in the recent West Indies series. Other than a few keen analysts like myself and a bunch of trolls seeking to dismiss and anger and annoy anyone related to Australian cricket, the broader Australian public simply isn't interested. It's AFL season. It's drawing close to its climax. The finals are going to start soon, and no one is really interested in a B team getting demolished by the West Indies. And now I'll talk briefly about player indifference. The founders of T20 cricket in Australia, or the first greats such as Ponting, McGrath, Lee and others, initially had a sort of disdain towards the T20 format. Ponting especially described his first T20 innings as a nightmare to play. This cannot be good for players coming up in the future. Other than a band of greats nowadays, the T20 format is often derided by our past experts as something we shouldn't be wasting our time on, or something that isn't important for us. That broader attitude has significantly hindered Australia's T20 development over a considerable period. And now I'd like to get into players missing key tours. Stemming from that culture of indifference, a lot of players see T20 as the format to miss out when they need a rest or when they are tired of playing for their national team. We are seeing that now. Even despite COVID, this West Indies tour has seen 5 or 6 first choice picks missing out on the squad. They are David Warner, Patrick Cummins, Glenn Maxwell, Steve Smith, Marcus Stoinis, Jai Richardson, and Kane Richardson. All 7 of them would be in this squad if they hadn't chosen to pull out. And this has been a consistent thread over recent years. The last T20 series Australia played versus New Zealand away saw a host of missed series players. The Warners, the Cummins, the Hazelwoods, the Smiths. All these players missed that series. And no wonder Australia is struggling. When you take essentially 5 first choice picks out of your 11, you are essentially putting up guys who aren't of the required standard against an opposition which is consistently playing their best 11. We saw that in the first 3 matches of this West Indies tour. West Indies played their best team. and annihilated an Australian team that was missing their biggest stars. I'm not saying that Australia would have easily won those games, but I am sure that it would have been a closer affair, especially if Australia had a solid finisher like the likes of Maxwell or Stoinis. Their absence in this series has been startling, with the likes of Moses Henriques, Ashton Turner and Dan Christian failing to provide the late order power to get Australia up to commanding totals. This indifference towards the T20 format is something that runs deep and has consistently been happening. After the 2017-18 Ashes series, Steve Smith decided he wouldn't play a series of T20 games against New Zealand and England. It almost seems that we don't care, that the leading players in Australia do not worry about the T20 format up until 6 months before the upcoming T20 World Cup. We can see it in the media as well. Australia's media conglomerates have had a vast indifference towards the T20 format right up until we start losing 6 months out from a major tournament. Then it is a matter for national concern. Everyone is in a hubbub. People without any expertise are chiming in, saying things like, "Oh, Finch needs to go. Why can't Warner be captain again?" and other ridiculous claims. This is an attitude which is tied directly to cultural indifference, in the sense that we only seem to care about the T20 format right up before a tournament. Other than that, it is that third format we grudgingly play to keep the ICC happy, when everyone's hearts is really in the Test and ODI series. And now I'd like to talk about selection issues. There are two main issues regarding batting and bowling I would like to highlight. First, let's start with players batting out of position. The recent Australian 11 saw Ashton Turner and Moses Henriques fill the middle order roles. Up until this series, Mitchell Marsh had been a consistent presence at 6 in the Australian order. Now, where do they bat in the BVL, I might have you ask? Well, Marsh and Turner consistently bat in the top 4 for the Perth Scorchers. So does Moses Henriques. Alex Carey, who was shunted down to the most difficult position in T20 during these recent games, number 4, is an opener for the Adelaide Strikers. Marcus Stoinis, Australia's premier face bowling all-rounder in this format, opens the batting in the BBL. You can see what thread I'm getting at here. Australia's batters are simply not batting in the positions they are being forced into the international T20 format. It is perfectly fine making 300 runs at a strike rate of 150, batting 3 in the Big Bash. But then we seem to think that they will achieve similar results batting 5 or 6 in the international format. It simply doesn't work like that. The Australian selectors seem to think that we can just shove the best 11 cricketers onto the field in the T20 format, which is something that we have seen time and time again doesn't work. As we've seen in this series, Ashton Turner can't miraculously become a finisher after batting in the top 3 time and time again. Alex Carey can't miraculously accelerate and score 15 off 5 balls at the end of an innings when he has consistently opened the innings and batted slowly before exploding at the end, similarly to Aaron Finch. The Australian selectors seem to not understand how T20 works and are simply trying to shove the best 11 cricketers in a random order that doesn't play to their strengths. And then I'd like to talk about the pace bowling. Out of all the positions in the Australian lineup, this is the area that would be the most difficult to pick when you find the best 11. The batting order essentially picks itself, something along the lines of Warner, Finch, Marsh, Smith, Maxwell, Stoinis, Carey or Wade maybe, somewhere thrown in there, and the 2 spin twins. That is just a general order I might add. I'm pretty sure I didn't pick a keeper because I'm a goose. And then you have the 2 spin twins and someone along the lines of Mitchell Starc or Pat Cummins. And then we get to the third pace bowling option. That has consistently been an issue for Australia. I can name multiple guys who have been tried in that position over the last 10 or so matches alone. Daniel Sams, Sean Abbott, Riley Meredith, Jai Richardson, Kane Richardson, Jason Berendorf, and Josh Hazlewood. That is 7 guys to try to fill 1 or 2 spots, and we have consistently found that some of them, that they lack consistency and struggle at the international level. Having a third pace bowler that consistently leaks runs is something you cannot have in T20 cricket. And we saw that as well as highlighted in the recent games, as well as the series versus India. We saw Daniel Sams coming in and consistently taking 2 for 40 every innings. Now, pardon me. Good God, I'm 10 minutes in, you're going to have to deal with that. Now, taking the 2 wickets itself is fine, but going for 40 runs in a high-pressure game simply isn't sustainable. We've seen that in the recent series as well. Hazlewood had 1 exceptional game and then went for 2 and then had 2 games where he was blown off the park by Chris Gayle, Evan Lewis and the like. This position is something that is costing Australia in many games. We nearly saw that yesterday, where Riley Meredith nearly cost Australia the game through some poor death bowling, only to be stopped by a brilliant over from Stark. These positions and these selection issues are something that Australia has had for a consistent period, and our selection committee and the captain Aaron Finch and the coach Justin Langer have failed to solve them. I am not entirely sure how to provide solutions to these. In terms of the batting, I'd start actually picking players in their positions. If you're going to pick Alex Carey, pick him as an opener. If you're going to pick Ashton Turner, pick him as a top order batsman. Why not pick guys like Tim David and the like who are suited to batting in the later middle order? It would be a groundbreaking change for the Australian selectors, but something that needs to happen if we're going to develop in the T20 game. You don't see India picking 5 openers and forcing them to bat at number 6, for example. They pick players based on positions. And with pace bowling, maybe we should start getting our players to actually care about the T20 format a bit more. Have guys like Josh Hazlewood consistently playing in overseas T20 leagues instead of being chucked in for an international series here and there. Maybe some consistent selections would be the key. I'm going to wrap it up here. This hasn't been the best video in terms of presentation from me, but I hope you've got across the broader points I'm trying to outline. That there is a broader indifference to the T20 game in Australia. Players themselves seem to also share this view, and at times the selections made by the Australian Cricket Board have been confusing and puzzling to say the least. Cheers, lads.